I'd like to call the ninth meeting of the House Standing Committee on Primary and Secondary Education to order. Jay, please call the roll.
Representative Bratcher. Here. Representative Emily Callaway. Representative Josh Callaway.
He's present.
Representative Camuel. Representative Doan. Representative Fleming. Representative Grossberg. Representative Hale.
Present.
Representative Jackson.
Present.
Representative Proctor. Representative Rayburn. Representative Riley.
Here.
Representative Tipton.
Here.
Representative Truitt.
Here.
Representative Wilner.
Here.
Vice Chair Kleins.
Here.
Ranking Minority Member Bojanowski.
Here.
Chair Lewis.
Here. Do any members have any introductions of guests? Seeing none. First item on the agenda will be Senate Bill 1 for discussion only. Senator Gibbons, if you'll come to the desk, introduce yourself for the record, and you may proceed.
Chairman Lewis, members of the House Education Committee, it's an honor to be here in front of you to have a conversation with you about Senate Bill 1. I understand that later this week, later today, tomorrow, you may have this up in front of you for consideration, and I appreciate the chance to share some thoughts with you. Senate Bill 1 is a sequel to what we had in 2022, regular session Senate Bill 1, and the reason for the sequel is the Supreme Court gave us what I call guidance. They said, we really don't like the path you traveled to get there because you didn't give enough reasons. And I share that with you, not tongue-in-cheek, I share that with you in seriousness. When you look at the court opinion regarding Senate Bill 1, the word reason appears multiple times throughout the document. I'm not going to read all of them to you, but I'll read one that sums it up rather succinctly. The court, in finding what we did to not be constitutional, said, we do not reach this conclusion lightly. In point of fact, we note that the government has had numerous opportunities to offer any reasonably articulable, natural, and distinctive basis for the class distinctions drawn in Senate Bill 1. In essence, the court is not saying we can't do it, dividing the way we treat a district from another district, but the court is saying we have to articulate really good, sound reasons. So that's the premise that you see in Senate Bill 1, and that's the reason it opens up with 42 different reasons for this district to be treated differently. And if I had a magic wand and had a way to say, let's create a new word, the English language fascinates me. I wish we could create new words, but it doesn't. Words have shared meaning. And I say that to say, almost all of us have an image in our mind of what a school district is. And the image we have in our mind is based on our life experiences and the folks back home and the folks that we know that serve so ably in our school district, especially on the school board. So when we think about a school board, the image in our mind is that group of 5 back home. What we've got to understand is that this organization, as articulated in the reasons that you see before you, is substantially different from what you and I know as our local school board. Taking point in the original filing, what I have is paragraph D. JCPS operates one of the largest public sector budgets in the entire Commonwealth, managing an annual district budget of approximately $1,900,000,000, which constitutes the largest public school district budget in Kentucky, exceeds the operating budget of Louisville Metro government, is more than twice the size of the Commonwealth's second largest public school district budget, and is nearly 6 times larger than the next largest district. The level of skill sets, the order of magnitude, and the responsibility of this school board is so different than anything else we know. So we've laid out 42 of these reasons. I'm not going to read them all to you. This is to lay the case out for us to have the ability within the court's view to treat this organization differently. I'm at the top of what I have as page 6 of the original bill, restructuring board responsibilities. If you recall the origin of what we had in 2022 on Senate Bill 1, we're redefining the responsibilities of the board and the superintendent. With regard to board responsibilities, restructure the board responsibilities to emphasize strategic planning, fiscal oversight, monitoring of academic and operational outcomes, and evaluation of executive performance that aligns governance practices with those required to manage complex public institutions responsibly. So we're taking the board out of the day-to-day operations. We're giving the board authority to hire the CEO to oversee day-to-day operations. And then we give that CEO, further over in the document, in our reasons, vesting day-to-day operational authority in a single chief executive officer subject to defined performance metrics and board oversight, promoting clarity of responsibility, accelerating decision-making, and strengthening accountability for results. So, all of those reasons put us back at the same place we were in 2022, redefining the role of the board of JCPS. There is a sub that's being talked about. I've got a copy of what I think is the sub. Chairman, do members have that copy? They do, great. If I could direct your attention there briefly. The changes in the sub as they have been shared with me, and I may overlook one or two because although I've been informed about the sub, I didn't have a copy specifically until just a few moments ago, but page 8, bottom of page 8, our original language in the original Senate Bill 1 for a county school district and a county with a consolidated local government. This is where we start to say this entity deserves to be treated differently, and this is the trigger. So the trigger was simply the consolidated local government piece. We're adding a second, more definitive trigger, or having 500,000 or more inhabitants. That's an addition in the sub that you see that's not in the original bill. Beyond that, I know there's another change with regard to the frequency of meetings, where I was told that would be here, so that if the need arose for more than one meeting a month, the board would have authority to do that. Chairman, beyond that, I don't recall the other changes in the sub. Do you happen to know?
Excuse me. Actually, I'm looking over it for the first time myself. So
The changes were not substantive. We gave the latitude for the board to meet more often than once a month. We put in that second trigger. Beyond that, I'm not certain.
it says on page 9, line 13, I think it's new, review and approve a rolling 3-year projection of expenses and revenues. I think that's a new one that was put in there.
Yes, sir, I agree. I think so too. As I conclude my presentation, I certainly would be glad to entertain any questions. I want to reflect on a statement that was made
You can do more than one.
by one of the board members as it relates to what he views their role to be and how they fit into this conversation. And this was back in January of 2020. No, I'm sorry. This was back in August of 23. You remember the conversation, the concerns, and the challenges they faced with the transportation situation there in August of 23. The school district had started. The bus routes weren't working properly. There was a lot of confusion on the logistics side. And Vice Chair James Craig, JCPS Vice Chair James Craig, said these words in an interview with the Courier-Journal. Well, remember what the Board of Education does. We approve budgets, we approve policy, we approve organization charts. We don't run the district. We aren't operations specialists. We hire the best available, we pay them handsomely, and we expect them to do their jobs well. I'm confident in our conversations around Senate Bill 1 that what you have before you is a piece of legislation that enables the Jefferson County public school system to operate more efficiently. It delineates for the board the high-level responsibilities they have, and it empowers the CEO to do the work day in and day out to operate this large organization as smoothly as possible. With that, I'll pause and be glad to entertain any questions.
We have someone else that signed up to speak. If you want to come to the table, Maddie Shepard with JCTA. Introduce yourself for the record and you may proceed.
Sure. I'm Maddie Shepard. I'm an elementary teacher serving as the president of the Jefferson County Teachers Association.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to speak on Senate Bill 1 today. I'm here to just reiterate some of the points I made the last time the bill was heard in front of the Senate Ed Committee. We in JCTA have an organizational platform outlining the things educators in JCPS and that our members really value and want to see in their schools. We call this platform The Schools Our Kids Deserve. And two of the things that are really important to educators are collaborative democratic decision-making and whole child and community-centered approaches to education. The reason, or a couple of the reasons, I'm speaking against this bill is because it represents a fundamental shift away from these things, collaborative democratic decision-making and whole child and community-centered approaches to education. This bill represents a move away from those things towards centralized executive control that weakens community voice, flies in the face of the values of the stakeholders that we convened, the educators in our schools. I also have to point out that this bill has been law before. We have done this, and it did not solve the problems in education as they've been defined. But lawmakers and educators have worked together to solve complex problems before, and though I don't think this bill is the answer, we can enact some processes and collaborative procedures to solve complex problems together again. At its core, public education in Kentucky is built on the principle that schools belong to the people and the communities that they serve. This bill undermines that principle of collaborative democratic decision-making because it strips power away from an elected board and concentrates it with unelected administrators. An unelected administrator that sat before Senate Ed and said he did not want that power. It alters democratic oversight, and this oversight, our democratically current school board and JCPS is often criticized for not exercising enough over our budget. That said, that may have saved us from the shortfall we're experiencing now. JCPS serves a uniquely diverse population, linguistically, culturally, socioeconomically, and these complexities argue for more community input, not less. Local board members are directly accountable to families, educators, and voters who experience the consequences of policy decisions every day. Replacing that collective judgment with one unilateral executive authority risks policies that could be faster, but not always better, not always fairer, or more responsive to the needs of the community. History, both in education and in other public systems, shows that concentrating authority rarely produces more accountability. When decision-making is centralized, failures become harder to challenge, dissent becomes muted, and communities have fewer levers to demand course correction. Our superintendent testified in Senate Ed that he did not want this centralized accountability. And although this bill targets one district today, it establishes a precedent that the state may override locally elected governance whenever it deems a district too complex. And that logic implies that complexity is inherently bad. That worse, though, every community's right to self-govern could be threatened. Today it's JCPS, but tomorrow it could be any district facing budget stress, and in Kentucky, that's happening more and more every day. This bill says to Kentuckians, we don't trust you to choose your own school board. We also know that this bill won't solve problems as they've been defined. We know this because we've been here before. While this bill was law, JCPS experienced the most severe transportation crisis in recent memory. While this bill was law, the conditions were created for us to experience the financial crisis that we're seeing play out before us right now. So to say that this is a solution for the problems as they've been defined, we know that that can't be the case because we've experienced it before. Education is really complicated, and that's not a bad thing. We're dealing with people. But problems can be solved in complicated ways with complicated solutions. We could do that together. Look back at the Shared Responsibility Bill from 2010. The medical insurance fund was a complicated problem. Pensions are complicated. Educators and lawmakers have worked together to come up with complicated solutions lots of times. and we could do that again. So I urge you to vote this bill down today because efficiency cannot be the sole measure of success in public education. Schools are not corporations, students are not widgets or line items, and democratic and collaborative decision-making may be slower and messier, but it's often essential to fairness, trust, and legitimacy. It makes for more democratic and community-centered approaches to education, which create the conditions for the schools, the districts, and the Kentucky our kids deserve. What we could do instead of this bill is enact a process, a task force, a committee, whatever we want to call it, to problem define together and to problem solve together.
Thank you. We do have some questions. Representative Bratcher.
Thank you for your statement. Appreciate that. What's your suggestion on fixing this? Every aspect, it seems like, and every measure that we look at in this school system doesn't seem to be improving. So what do you suggest?
I won't argue that there's growth that needs to happen, but education is complex and there's a number of factors that happen outside the walls of a school that manifest in the school. So I think it's not one simple answer that I could rattle off to you right now. To pretend that I could would not be doing service to the complexity of public education in Kentucky, and not do justice to the process and the care that this problem and this situation really deserves. I'm being genuine in saying I think lawmakers and educators should get together maybe during the interim and problem define and problem solve together. One of my mentors says that a problem well defined is a problem half solved. And so I think if we are to get together and really look and say, what are the things plaguing JCPS, but not only JCPS, schools in general, and what are some solutions, a multitude of solutions, maybe not just one bill, but several, that we could enact together. I think that sort of collaborative conversation and process is the first of many solutions.
Representative Wilner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is for you, Senator Givens. Thank you both for your remarks. Just a quick question on page 8 of the committee sub that all of us are just now seeing. There's the addition or having 500,000 or more inhabitants. So we know that the consolidated local government refers only to Louisville and Jefferson County, but are there any other municipalities in Kentucky currently that would be included in this under that 500,000?
No, there are not.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So my next question, actually, I will say on page 9, there's the addition of review and your projection of expenses and revenues, and I quite like that. I think that's excellent, and I think that might have helped us to avoid the budget shortfall that we're in right now. So I think that's really smart. So thank you for including that. Then I'm going to turn to a couple of concerns that I have on pages 10 and 11. So, we have just, both the Senate and the House have passed different versions, but have passed Senate Bill 4, and I think where there was agreement, and Senate Bill 4 was to add more financial expertise onto the school boards of our two largest school districts. And it's hard to argue that we don't need more financial expertise when we see currently that both of our largest school districts have made some financial missteps, are now facing deficits, and those deficits, at least in Jefferson County, have not been fully explained. And so I guess I'm curious why we're on the one hand saying that we need more financial oversight, and now I'm looking specifically at page 11D, more financial oversight is needed, and yet this bill says that less financial oversight is needed, that the superintendent should have much more ability to spend money differently than originally planned and to move things around in the budget up to $1 million without board oversight. And given Auditor Ball's examination of Fayette County Public Schools earlier this year, earlier in 2025, where there was, she reported financial misspending. None of this, all of that should have been caught by a board if things were being transparently reported. But sorry, I've got distracted. All of that should have, if it were transparently reported, a board should have caught that. But under this, it could not be caught. And I know that when I served on the Jefferson County School Board, we had the opportunity to pull down from the consent agenda contracts. Sometimes, somebody in the community might say, what's up with this contract? And it was an opportunity for the board to say, help us understand what's up with this contract. And under this, there could be a lot of money moved around without transparency to the public and without board oversight, and that seems like a concern. So I'd love your thoughts about that, and then I have one more after that.
Representative, good question, good observation, and I'm going to respectfully push back in that I think this actually constrains instead of expands, and it's a little bit of a hard reading because you've got to read through what the current language is. Current language says, board shall authorize superintendent to approve a line item transfer within its annual budget as she or he deems necessary, provided that the aggregate amount of any individual transfer does not exceed $250,000. So there's an unlimited number that can be done as long as they're all below 250 in the current language as I read it. Mm-hmm. This says the limit is now 250 in the aggregate amount of all transfers per quarter. So I think this actually constrains that authority instead of expanding it, if I'm reading it correctly.
I think that this constrains it more, this committee sub constrains it more than in the original version of the bill,
Yes.
But it expands it from where we are currently, which I think any amount over $25,000 has to be on some consent agenda. Most of those things never get pulled down, don't slow things down, don't bog down the system, but there's public oversight and transparency. And occasionally, there are public questions, and there's that opportunity. Now, and you're right, this is $250,000 per quarter that the superintendent can move around. So that's $1 million a year without public oversight, without board oversight.
But again, that's the aggregate amount of all transfers under this new language, as opposed to the current language, which is the aggregate amount of any individual transfer. It's kind of a challenging read, isn't it?
I feel like we're talking past each other, I'm
not purposely talking
No,
past
I'm
you.
not either, and
Okay.
I'm not meaning to be disrespectful
No.
in any way. So currently, without Senate Bill 1, just the way the status quo right now, the superintendent does not have that much discretion to spend, to move money around without public oversight and without this bill at all. Just the way we are right now. If we were to pass this bill, even in the more constrained version that's in the substitute, we're giving superintendents a lot of latitude to move money behind closed doors with no public transparency. And given problems we've seen in our two largest districts, that seems unwise to me. And it also seems contradictory to what we've just done with Senate Bill 4, which is to say we need more financial oversight, not less. So this has more financial oversight than the original version of Senate Bill 1, but it's still less financial oversight than what we currently have in law. Does that make sense?
Thank you for trying.
All right, the next question, Representative Bojanowski.
Okay, so I've been given some additional information about this specific topic. So apparently the $250,000 was voided in the Supreme Court decision. And so we are not currently under the same language in this because it was voided by the Supreme Court, and it's my understanding that the current limit is 25,000. As far as my question, Rep. Wilner effectively asked my question, but just from my position, I also see this initiative in complete contrast to what we've passed in Senate Bill 4. So more authority to the superintendent and less information to the school board about finances I see as problematic. So Rep. Wilner asked it very well. There was a little bit of confusion, but I think that the point still stands that it's concerning. So then the other piece is if you want to look and see what makes a difference in a district, do you want to do two very major changes, or do you want to go in one direction and see how the effects of that initiative go and then add on another direction? So at this point, and I understand a lot of the pieces of Senate Bill 1, but at this point, I think that I would more support what we did in Senate Bill 4 and potentially look to do something like this after a couple of years and we see what the impact of Senate Bill 4 is and then move on. Thank you.
Representative Truitt.
Thank you, Senator Givens. We all realize the importance of a good leader. And superintendent is the ultimate leader of a district, so we understand the importance of that. And in my experience working with you, Senator, you're very thorough on everything that you've done. So my question is, in your opinion, do you think that for Jefferson County that sometimes in past that maybe the superintendent was handcuffed by his board, wanted to make certain changes, and maybe his board wasn't on board with that? Is that kind of where this bill came from, or do you think that's a possibility of kind of what could result from this legislation passing?
Representative, great question. Thank you for the question. And I can certainly only speak anecdotally, having not been on the board, but having been in the education policy space now for many more years than I wish to publicly say out loud. We have two things going on here, in my opinion. Absolutely, the superintendent would be very desirous to have the sort of authority that this would give to him or her, as would any CEO of an organization this complex and this large. The 2 points I'd like to make, my co-presenter used the word complexity multiple times, and I'm going to direct your attention to the top of page 5 in the committee sub. And this goes directly to answering your question. There on line 4 of page 5, we have one of those reasons that we talked about for the necessity of this legislation. Whereas districts operating at such a large scale and high level of complexity require governance structures that clearly distinguish between strategic oversight, policy setting, and accountability on the one hand, and day-to-day operational management and execution on the other. I think absolutely the superintendent would say, I need this power, I need this authority, and a good leader, you use the phrase a good leader, and we've seen what good leaders can do and how positive they can be for organizations. A good leader acknowledges that he or she is on the tip of the spear. And to be on that tip of that spear, they need the authority that we're giving them in this legislation. So I feel very confident that this can be good for an organization of this size.
Thank you. Follow up, Chairman.
Wait.
So would this legislation prevent a school board from removing a superintendent in any way if they're doing something inappropriate? Or, I've always thought in my world of education that the superintendent is usually the easiest person to remove. It's easier than a principal or a teacher, which takes, multiple years. So does this legislation in any way prevent this board from saying, superintendent, you've crossed the line, we're removing you? Any type of...
No, not at all. Not at all. It does not prevent the board from that authority and power, and that's exactly the sort of authority and power the board has to have. To be able to say, look, we appreciate your effort at leadership. You're not following the vision we've set forth. The results that you're providing are inadequate for what we demand and what the citizens deserve. and mainly the students. The education outcomes, the financial mismanagement that's happening in District X, sir, we appreciate your effort. Ma'am, we appreciate you trying, but don't let the door hit you on the way out.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Might I comment on Representative Truitt's question also?
Go ahead.
I don't think we have to posit on whether our superintendent would want or need this bill because he testified in front of Senate Ed that he did not.
Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the thoughts going through this bill and trying to make the school system much better. I have a question for Maddie, if you don't mind. You made several statements which I agree with, and I think that's very insightful. But I want to make sure that reflect on back on 2024 when we had a Jefferson County task force. We called it efficiency, effectively, whatever it's like. I don't know, it's an acronym.
It had a long name.
Long name. It's almost like SICK. But in any event, for the most part, we went through a laborious process of looking at early childhood issues, student behavior, audit, finance, management plan, CSI, and also looked at trying to have maybe a different grading system instead of using numerical, using alpha, in terms of, all right, that's a little more, like when you look at one, is that good or bad? But A is an A. So we looked at that. I want to ask you, when you mentioned that the educational organization, whether it's primary or if it's a secondary or even a post-secondary, it is different. And it cannot be run as a business, but it can use several business practices on there. And some of the things we looked at, which Representative Wilner and I talked about, there's a lot of stuff that kids bring to school. One is psychological challenges, and I've always been a proponent, and she's been a proponent, not to call her out, but we've been a proponent trying to find that. What suggestions? You mentioned that we need to get together a lawmaker. Well, we've done that. So what more can we do in order to try to address this challenge that Senator Givens is trying to address to make this school in a much better situation, mainly for our kids, and that's what it's all about, it's our kids, but also to support teachers and making sure that they have the resources internally, that they're not always looking over the shoulder, so they can teach these kids how to be successful. So what more can be done in terms of just going through this process that we've done before, which unfortunately things that came up really wasn't recommended because we are having that court suit going on.
So the task force I thought was very informative and educative. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the purpose of the task force was really to explore the question about, is breaking up JCPS a viable strategy to solve the problems in JCPS as they've been defined?
And I respectfully, that was not mine, and then quite a few other individuals on that task force. That was not our goal.
Okay.
My goal has always been to try to find resources to get our kids. That is one option among many options. In terms of how we can address the structure. So I know the public opinion. I know it's out there, but that was not my goal, as well as other legislators on that task force goal to do that. Even though there are some who want to do that, that's fine, but that's wasn't our goal.
I appreciate the clarification, and there were a number of speakers and kind of pieces of research that were shared on a landscape across the country about consolidation versus deconsolidation of school systems across the country. We looked at a number of pieces of operations and education facets of JCPS. Like I said, I thought it was really educative and informative for educators, for internal members of JCPS, external members of JCPS. And I think that process was a really good first step of what I view as kind of a longer term process. That was a really good information gathering process. There were multiple kind of presentations about how this department works, or how I think there was a lot of information shared about the sheer magnitude of our ELL or our multilingual learner population, and the impacts that the magnitude of that population has on how our district is organized and the needs we have to meet, but also the impact on the population that we serve and how that manifests in some of our assessment and accountability scores. So I think that kind of information gathering and sharing of that information is a good first step. What I'm kind of proposing or imagining, and I wouldn't want to be the only person proposing or imagining, I would want this to happen collaboratively among a number of stakeholders, would be a process where after we share and gather information, where we define problems together. And again, I think there are problems that manifest in schools, but that start other places. This body has done a really good job of exploring housing issues across the state this session and in the interim. Those play out in schools all the time, and they affect how our assessment and accountability scores look on paper. It's no secret that Kentucky is struggling economically. That plays out in schools all the time. And so I think a multifaceted, multi-pronged conversation and strategy is something that could happen among legislators, educators, other nonprofit stakeholders in Kentucky. But that I do view that task force as a really good first step. I think there were some recommendations that came out of that task force. I'm not familiar with how they've been enacted since then, but I think that process is a good model for us to look at for something to kind of magnify and expand upon in the future.
Mr. Chairman, could I get back in?
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, I'm sorry.
No, and I appreciate those comments, and there is a lot more that we can do without a doubt. It does get frustrating. We go down and then we find ourselves not implementing the recommendations or whatever the case may be, but we like I said, I agree. We need to take a more collaborative approach in order to try to work things out. And I wish I had a crystal ball and say, poof, it's all done. We're here. But we need to take an incremental approach. And that task force, I thought, was a very good beginning, and it could have gone a whole lot further. But given the environment, it wasn't possible. The school systems can't solve everything. I mean, we've got economic issues, we got housing issues, we got all sorts of issues. We got to focus on the kids and making sure that we have programs and processes and support to those kids. That's where our focus is. And no matter what happens, we need to be conscious of that. So this legislative body can't solve everything, but we need to take a more of an incremental strategic approach and focusing on the children. Thank you.
Senator Givens, do you have something else?
Yeah, briefly, Mr. Chairman, and I know time is valuable, and I don't want to extend it further than it needs to be, and certainly want to respond to any questions. But when we think about entities and organizations that have been studied, JCPS is at the top of the list. We talk about task forces, and I appreciate the work that task forces do, but if we're going to create another task force to explore questions or probe or audit or investigate or discuss, if that's the goal, while students are continuing to flounder, as we read in the committee sub about JCPS state assessment results, the financial challenges of managing an organization like this with public acknowledgement by JCPS that substantive financial and operational deficiencies have occurred within the district, if we're going to continue to take the time to do the conversation pieces and explore and task force and audit and probe and investigate while all of this is going on, then we're culpable for the continued failure of this district. And I would ask that we not do that. Let's not set up another task force to investigate further. I would encourage, Mr. Chairman, respectfully, that when the time comes that this committee has Senate Bill 1 before it, I would hope that it would be considered favorably.
Thank you. Representative Tipton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Givens, Maddie, appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
In my 12 years in the General Assembly, my 10th year on this committee. I've been involved in a lot of conversations, and obviously this has been a topic. JCPS has been a topic for many years. And listening in on a lot of conversations, I don't know how many people are aware, there was a period of time when it was a very real possibility that KDE was going to take over JCPS. And I know that I see the commissioner's worried. I'm going to put more on him back there. And KDE has taken over some school districts. And we talk about financial issues. This is not just a large school district issue. I'm not going to name names, but I'm aware of other school districts that are dealing with issues. So my question, Senator Givens, is do we need to examine the authority that KBE has and that KDE and their oversight role? And not just our large school districts, but of all our school districts, and how they review not only the financial but the outcomes in our school districts, and maybe have more authority to go in and take action when necessary.
Excellent question, Chair Tipton, and thank you for that remembrance of that attempt at one time by the Bevin administration to say we're going to go in and we're going to actually take over this district. And I think that was emblematic of the sort of challenges that we're trying to address with this legislation in this regard. Statutorily, we gave substantial authority to the governor to go in and do that. Statutorily, we said in this set of circumstances where we have persistently low achieving schools that are continuing to fail, to use a phrase that former Commissioner Terry Holliday used in the first Beshear administration, in the Steve Beshear administration, continuing academic genocide is what he referred to what was happening in the west end of Louisville. In those circumstances, we give the governor some authority to go in. What was seen in that case when the Bevin administration went into JCPS to try to take on the task was they were going to end up with responsibility but not sufficient authority. And that is a dangerous combination when you give someone partial responsibility but limited authority. And I think that's exactly what we're trying to address here. We're saying to the superintendent, you are responsible. We're going to hold you responsible. The board is going to hold you responsible, but we're going to limit your authority. This is an effort to broaden that authority, not free rein authority, but to broaden that authority so that the person that's responsible is also able and tasked and charged to have the authority to handle that responsibility.
Representative Wilner, last question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence. Senator, maybe we'll understand each other better this time. I'll give it my best shot at clarity. So I'm looking on page 10, number 2, where the policy approval, the board has traditionally been the policy makers. We know that in reality, often the superintendent recommends policy, the board approves it or not. This would now require 2/3 vote of the board to deny approval. So I was thinking about what you just said about partial responsibility and limited authority. So now again in Senate Bill 4, we're talking about reconstituting the board, giving the board more financial expertise, but then we're talking about limiting its oversight, its authority on policy. And I just wonder what the rationale is. Why would we not just have a simple majority, a 4-3 would be enough to approve or overturn something? Why is it a higher threshold here?
Representative, I want to clarify that I'm looking at the right place. I'm on page 10,
Yes.
sub B, sub 2,
Sub B, sub 2, correct.
and that's existing language.
No, it was overruled by the Supreme Court.
It was overruled by the Supreme Court, so it's not existing language.
Okay.
So it's returning language, I guess.
So that's one of the challenges that we face is when the court overrules it, we don't see the reversion back to the current law.
Right.
So state again what the current law is for me.
So currently, it's just a majority. A board has, if there's a 7-member board, decisions can be decided 3-4 in either direction. And so this is 2/3, so it's a higher threshold.
Sure. Great question. And that complies with what I said just a moment ago in response to Representative Tipton's question. This goes to that responsibility authority piece. If we're going to say that he or she, that superintendent, has the responsibility, they've got to have the authority to fulfill that mission.
But don't elected board members also have authority?
They certainly do. They hire and fire. And so it is, as we indicated in our earlier conversation, any CEO / superintendent that's going to utilize these sorts of powers needs to be skillful and wise in doing it, because the people that hire them and fire them is sitting right across the table from them. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for your presentation.
Chairman, thank you. And members, thanks for your indulgence in a long conversation. I appreciate very much your thoughtful consideration. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you very much, and thank you for your attention to public education and JCPS. We value your partnership.
Our next bill for discussion only will be House Bill 609.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kevin Jackson, Representative District 20, Bowling Green, and part of Warren County.
Hi, my name is Blair Walden. I'm a special education teacher in Jefferson County at Whitney Young Elementary at Englehart.
Chairman Lewis, committee members, thank you for the opportunity to present. I tried to get this on the agenda earlier, and the chairman wouldn't give me an opportunity, and one of my former students, Kate Wood over here, convinced the chairman to put it on the agenda, so I appreciate that. I
think everybody can understand that.
I see how much authority I have and pull, but this is not hardly as serious a conversation as the one we just had, but it's still an important conversation. Anytime you talk about reading and the capability and improvement of reading and reading scores, it's an important topic. So thank you for allowing us to do this. I know you gave me an hour, but I should be able to do this in 45 minutes. It shouldn't take an hour, but that was a joke. That was a joke. House Bill 609 is an act relating to classroom libraries. In my 37 years in education, I found that reading and reading comprehension were the two biggest factors in student success. Now, motivation and other factors play a role as well, but I still go back to reading and reading comprehension. Reading has been a priority of this committee for several years. Representative Tipton, I thought you were going to leave us. I was going to brag on you here, so I'm glad you came back. But thanks to the leadership of my colleagues, Representative Tipton and Chair Lewis, we passed the Read to Succeed Act in 2022, launching a statewide commitment to improve early reading instruction by strengthening educators' understanding and use of the science of reading. One of the best things that we have done here in the legislature, I think. Since then, thousands of Kentucky teachers and administrators have engaged in letters training, bringing research-aligned practices directly into K-5 classrooms. These practices are working. 2024 and 2025 assessment results from the Kentucky Department of Education show encouraging growth in student performance across the Commonwealth, especially in literacy. Students achieved higher rates of proficient and distinguished performance in reading than in recent years, signaling that our multi-year investment in evidence-based literacy practices are paying off. Even though teachers have completed the Science of Reading boot camp, we can't send them into battle without the right tools. And after consulting with the Kentucky Department of Education, it has become clear that the most efficient tool we can give our teachers are books. And not just any books, but a classroom library fully equipped with books at multiple reading levels so that a child reading below grade level can build their confidence and decodable text while a child in the same classroom reading a few grade levels ahead can immerse themselves in a book that fully captures their imagination. I've got 4 small grandchildren, and I would like to use 2 of them as an example here. My oldest one is 11 in the 5th grade, and I mean, he's sharp as a tack. He takes after his mother's side of the family, not ours. So that's where he got his smarts. But he reads 40 to 50 AR books a school year. He ranks in the top of his class on all the testing. But I think that reading is the reason why. His mother's a teacher, and he got off to a good start. My 7-year-old granddaughter, who's had some health issues, surgeries, missed a lot of school, is struggling with reading. But we're hiring her a tutor for reading, and she's already starting to make improvements by leaps and bounds. So that's just 2 examples of how reading, one that reads well, takes off, and one that's struggling with reading is having trouble. Research from the University of North Carolina shows that access to books is one of the strongest predictors of a student's academic success. When children grow up with books that challenge and inspire them, they develop stronger literacy and critical thinking skills. Books also help children develop empathy and emotional regulation by providing opportunities to discuss feelings and coping strategies. We know that getting books in the hands of our earliest readers is critical to a child's entire academic trajectory. Research by the Annie E. Casey Foundation found that 3rd graders who lack proficiency in reading are 4 times more likely to become high school dropouts. That is why I have introduced House Bill 609, which will equip nearly half of all elementary school educators across the Commonwealth with $500 to build their own classroom libraries. This classroom libraries grant would target teachers working with low-income students to address the ongoing literacy gap among Kentucky students who are furthest from opportunity. The grant would also prioritize teachers, librarians, and other literacy instructors working with the grade levels most foundational to teaching reading, kindergarten through 3rd grade first, and then followed by grades 4 and 5 if money is available. The grant would be implemented by the Kentucky Department of Education in collaboration with a charitable, project-based platform that empowers teachers to request books and other literacy materials to teach the science of reading and meet the immediate needs of the students in their own classroom. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Ms. Blair Walden, who has taught special education in Jefferson County Public Schools for 6 years. Representative Bojanowski does the same thing. Ms. Walden has been able to build her own classroom library thanks to Donors Choose, a nonprofit charity that helps public school educators get the classroom resources they need to help their students. Ms. Blair.
Good morning, Chair Lewis and committee. Yes, my name is Blair Walden, and I'm here to speak in support of House Bill 609. Education is deeply personal to me. I come from a long line of Kentucky educators, and I'm a 4th-generation teacher. I was raised in a family that believes in the power of education to change lives, and I carry that belief with me into my classroom every day. When I became a teacher 6 years ago, I built my classroom from scratch with only a box of materials passed down from my mom, who was a teacher. I saw firsthand that many of my students didn't have the basic resources they needed to learn. Some students needed books and school supplies, and other students needed necessities like food and clothing. While schools do provide support, those resources come with limits, deadlines, and restrictions, and it was clear that my students lacked what they needed to be successful. Then I discovered Donors Choose, which is a nonprofit charity that helps public school educators get classroom resources they need to help their students learn. And for the last 25 years, Donors Choose has supported teacher resource requests in almost 90% of public schools across the nation, including 1,200 schools here in Kentucky. I have personally raised $11,000 in classroom resources thanks to 73 projects funded by Donors Choose. These resources have allowed me to meet my students' individual needs and empowering them with learning tools like decodable books, flashcards, and special items like iPads for students with autism and assistive technology. Meeting my students' basic needs has allowed me to focus on addressing their academic achievement gaps. When I had a 5th grade student who could not yet write their name, let alone write a simple sentence, I knew something had to change, and it had to change quick. Fortunately, I have been a part of JCPS's first cohort of LETTERS, which is the language essentials for teachers of teaching of reading and spelling. And this is a comprehensive 2-year program which focuses on literacy and understanding how the brain learns to read. So thanks to this, I have been able to ensure my instruction is aligned with how the brain learns, and there's still some gaps. In order for this instruction to be effective, students must have access to materials that align with the skills that they're learning. So that's why classroom libraries are so important. They are ensuring that all elementary classrooms in Kentucky not only have books, but decodable text and skill-aligned reading materials that allow students to practice what they're learning. These materials allow a student to successfully read a book independently, building confidence, motivation, and a sense of accomplishment that is critical for struggling readers. The challenge is that many of these specific resources are costly and not always provided by school districts. That's why I strongly support House Bill 609, which will empower almost half of all elementary school teachers in our state with $500 to build their own classroom libraries. By partnering with Donors Choose, teacher requests that exceed $500 can be funded by the nationwide networks of corporations and individuals that use Donors Choose. And as the saying goes, it takes a village. Donors Choose provides a powerful way for that village to show up for Kentucky teachers and allows the state's investment to go even further. House Bill 609 is an opportunity to directly support students like mine who are waiting for someone to believe in them and give them the resources they need to succeed. Thank you for your time and your support of this bill.
We do have a couple questions. Representative Josh Callaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple questions, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
One thing I think that has been on my mind as I was reading through this bill, and a few years back, I think it was 2023, we passed Senate Bill 5 that dealt with a perimeter and also gave a process for parents to be able to contest certain books that have made it into the school libraries. And I'm just looking at one particular book that's in JCPS right now. In the description, it says that it contains sexual activities, incest, sexual nudity, profanity, suicide, alcoholism, references to drug use, references to sexual assault, alternate sexualities. And so you brought up the point that that books can teach empathy, and that has been part of the argument as to why to keep some of this filth inside of the school libraries that are there now. So is there a way to put parameters in this bill that says if they're coming into the classroom, what is educational and what will not be allowed to be brought in there if they're going to add more books into the system, specifically in the classroom, which makes them more accessible to children?
Good question. Representative Callaway, do you know what grade level that was, the book that you were talking about? Do you know what grade level?
I do. It's in high school, but
Okay.
It's paid for by taxpayers, and it's filthy, obscene material. I can get you some of the pictures and stuff of it. It's beyond shocking.
Okay. We never thought about that. That never came into, we're talking about K through 5, and I understand your concern, and that's something we would definitely take a look at. We don't want that either. So that's something that we could take a look at, but never even thought about that. We're just trying to get books in the classroom so kids can read more and at different levels. What I think about when I was in school, we got to go to the library about 15 minutes once a week. And if you got a book and a good quick reader could read theirs in 2 days, and they had 3 days that they didn't have anything to read. An old slow reader like me, it took me 5 or 6 days to read mine. So that's kind of what we were thinking about, if we can bring those books into the classroom at all different levels. But good question, something we can take a look at.
And I don't disagree with that at all. It's definitely a missing element. My wife reads to my grandkids all the time. Their mom reads to them every night. They're getting ready to start school. It is imperative for learning, so I agree with that wholeheartedly. I just want to make sure that we're protecting the innocence and the minds of the children as well.
Yes, sir. Appreciate the question.
Representative Emily Callaway.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for coming to visit. And as somebody who attended Whitney Young, I am especially proud that you're here today. So they're 2nd through 5th grade. Back when school looked a little bit different, I was in the advanced program, so that looked a little bit different. I would say a lot different. So I'm especially proud to see you here today and to hear, your passion for getting books into kids' hands. I'm all about that. My grandmother was a librarian for a couple decades over at Iroquois High School, so and the librarian at the church. So we've been very, very involved. And I'm trying to really grasp what we're looking at here. I've seen, Amazon wish lists come through. I've been able to help a school in Memphis, Tennessee, fulfill some of their wishes. And so I see opportunities for this to kind of exist anyway in a manner. I'm trying to figure out why we're not utilizing our existing libraries to make this happen. So if we can get some kind of grant money, using our existing system, the librarian is already ordering age-appropriate books. They're aligning with the criteria and the curriculum. So we already have kind of a system in place. So, in my mind, I would love to see, instead of going to an outside source, actually utilizing what we have within our libraries. Our librarians are very knowledgeable. They can equip the teachers. They would be kind of the go-between, and it would be a consistent program, again, that we already have in place. The teacher could, like we do with the book fairs, they put a wish list together, and then it's submitted, and then the books come in through the librarian. The librarian will distribute them and all that. So I like the idea of figuring out a grant program. I'm concerned that we just focus on the 40% of the students eligible for federal free and reduced lunch programs. Some of that is a little bit concerning, but I get it. So I just wonder why we're not kind of leaning in to our existing and making the trips to the library more frequent, if nothing else, or equipping a classroom, having a revolving library even, because if you were to set it with the same books, the kids get tired of reading the same books, to rotate, to share with other classrooms. So I love the idea here. I love the passion. If you could just kind of help me understand why we landed on this specific layout.
Well, that's a good question too. I think that 2nd grade teacher, probably Representative Callaway, probably knows exactly what her students that she sees year in and year out would be interested in, maybe more so than even a librarian. Nothing to take away from a librarian, but they're trying to service the whole school, not just that classroom, So I think that would be something. I think if they had their own classroom set, there's times where a kid gets done with his work, wants to go up and get a book maybe and just go back and sit down and start reading that book in the classroom instead of waiting to the day that they get to go to the library and picking up another book. So I think it's just a combination. I think they're the expert in that classroom on when they have time to read, what students at that level really specifically like to read. So I think that was just kind of our thinking, that if every classroom had their own set of books, and that $500 would help start the process. And some schools and some teachers would even add to that by doing, as Blair said, putting it out there and getting more donations from corporations and across the state. So I don't know if that answers, but that was kind of my thinking.
Last question, Representative Kleins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I love this bill. I think in the back in the day, we used to call them specials, right? Library, PE, technology. And, I think the library is treated far from special. I wouldn't even consider it treated ordinarily. I'd almost consider it treated expendable. So I would love to see more attentiveness given to libraries, maybe working with the Kentucky Library Association, because I believe there are statutes in place right now for librarians that aren't even being followed. I mean, you have librarians being shared between schools, librarians that have to teach and don't even have time to check out, librarians that don't have time to shelve books. So I think this is a symptom of a bigger problem. So Representative Jackson, and I'd love to work with you over the summer with the Kentucky Library Association and just put a lot more meat and a lot more teeth into this, and let's get money to the libraries and the classrooms.
Thank you, Representative Kleins. I did have, I will say, I'll finish with this. I did have the Association of Libraries come to my office. They were concerned when they first got there about this bill because they thought it might put them out of a job or take away from librarians and kids going to libraries. But by the time we went through it, they were 100% on board with this, and they love the idea of doing this. So I just wanted to make that clear that they did come to my office and we discussed this bill. They had some apprehension in the beginning, but before they left, they were 100% on board. Thank you.
Before we adjourn, I have a couple announcements if I can get my voice working. It's likely today on adjournment, excuse me, that we'll probably be back in here or some room to vote on Senate Bill 1. So just be mindful of that. The other thing I'd like to do, this is probably our last scheduled meeting, I would like to introduce our staff and thank them for the job they've done this year. They've done a really good job in putting up with me and all the things that I put them through. And then for committee members, thank you all for your attention and work this year. I think we've had some meaningful bills pass through our committee. So I'll start off, Karen Lee. If you all stand up also, and we're going to thank everyone. Yvette Perry right next to me. There's Yvette. Peter Wright is over in the corner. Lauren Bush. I don't know if she's in here. Jay Harris sitting right beside me here. Josh Collins, not here. Emily Wiley. And our intern is Rachel Hammond. So if you all would thank these people, I appreciate it. And seeing no further business.
Mr. Chair, I served with you on the Kentucky High School Athletic Association Board of Control, and spent 4 years here with you in the General Assembly. And in an odd way, I'm going to miss looking up at you when I'm testifying, and your attempt at humor and being funny. But I think on behalf of certainly as me, as the vice chair, and on our committee, we know you're not coming back next year, so we certainly want to thank you for your leadership. It's lonely at the top. Education, everybody seems to know a little bit about education, and you've just done a wonderful job in staying focused on what we can, almost like the Serenity Prayer, that you have the wisdom to know what we can change and what we can't. So I really, really want to thank you and appreciate you, and how about we thank him collectively?
Yeah. Thank you all. Thank you. I don't like this, but